How does that fit into the clearinghouse? Help me out. Okay, is it a blog? Is it an active thing? I mean, are there new ideas out there? The more clarity I can get, the better off we are all going to be. But great question. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
You talked a lot about the framework, and I was just curious as if this were successful and created some useful byproducts, would your plan to be to open that to the public, or would it be to keep it within DoD or government or something along those lines?
If I didn't make it clear, this is being proposed to be really the entity for public and private sector participation. And the last thing I want is for this to be managed by the DoD or DHS. You heard from our last panel some of the frustration that takes place. Okay? So you've heard of FFRDCs and 501c3s. These are, not-for-profit entities. I mean, if there's something new out there, let me know what it is, because we want to make sure that legally it works. But the key is, when good ideas start to permeate, we've got to be able to share those. So that is a key byproduct. Okay, but hooked into that clearinghouse are all the various entities. So right now, this framework is a little at 64,000 feet. As you start to break it down and say, okay, you, me, we're part of the framework team. We're going to figure out what goes into that framework. Well, we want it to be a common operating picture, want it to be a repository, we want it to be this and that, okay? Those are the types of things that need to go into that. And of course, we've got to be able to share the information.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
When the military was looking at how to manage kind of the out-of-war component of its resource pool, they turned to essentially the National Guard component that said, right, why don't we have a component of soldiers who train, not every day, but train infrequently and are and essentially ready to be called up into service whenever this happens.
Right.
Have they considered a kind of National Guard, in a sense, component for this, where you in fact incentivize by saying, okay, we can make it an almost kind of paramilitary type arrangement. You can put it in an infrequent training arrangement where you can say, we're going to pay you like they pay guards, National Guard soldiers. Yep. You get a training component that's right in place, and again, a kind of disciplined, flexible component that could be brought in on a regular basis, right, done in that setting where the incentive is to say, yeah, you're going to go out and work a weekend every 6 weeks or whatever, or right, 1 weekend a month, or however the National Guard is structured, right, but do it in a way that it's additional income, but it's also recognition for what they're doing in terms of rank in this.
Yes, I mean, what you're identifying is a model, is a model that exists today. Now, I'm a retired Air Force Reserve member. Guard and Reserve make up what's called the ARC, the Reserve component. Now, just assume that these individuals that participate in the Guard and Reserve, they have other jobs, and many of them do the things that you all do. They're the closest thing within DoD to the private sector. Okay, we know that. So in that war game that I just showed you, the Schriever war game, one of the nodes, when I was presenting it to our leadership, said ARC on it, because it's easy for us to go into our files and identify Captain so-and-so, Major, Lieutenant Colonel so-and-so that works in this company and that company, who brings certain types of expertise there. Okay, so absolutely, these are exactly the types of nodes that we're hooking into. I mean, having spent 22 years as one of them, there's huge value in leveraging the expertise that they bring to the fight.
It certainly seems that foreign governments are doing this very type of thing. I mean, that's exactly, if you look at Brazil, if you look at China, you look at the way that they're essentially bringing on very young individuals, but essentially creating that kind of paramilitary arrangement where right, they belong to this group, and that group has an affiliation and allegiance to the group that's training.
I understand. I mean, as I mentioned in the last discussion, the military thinks very traditionally, all due respect to that. Okay, they're regimented, they're here to take care of all of you. Okay, but when it comes to the cyber domain in which the intellectual property resides with you, our approach is to basically walk up to an engineer in our military, wave a wand over him and say that you're now a cyber expert. Okay, does that make any sense? So I sit back saying, literally, you can't train these individuals fast enough So we need a new mechanism. How difficult is it to have a couple of cyber experts, but form a relationship with the private sector where you help us jumpstart from where we are today to where we need to be tomorrow, which is at your level of competency. That's the partnership that has to take place. Okay? Thank you very much, sir.
You've, excuse me, you've touched on a couple of the issues that inherently make this a difficult relationship with the FAR. My initial question was going to be, once the capability was described as being available to you in 3 weeks, how long did it take you to procure that capability? I suspect it took longer than 3 weeks. With that in mind, this community, the Black Hat community, inherently we come together for a love of attacking processes and finding the chinks in the armor, the breakdown in the processes. So to approach it with the traditional idea of process-driven frameworks is going to be a difficult marriage indeed to achieve with this kind of culture. Have you considered looking further again at the open market model and essentially becoming, if you will, a large investor in that model in such a way that based on performance, we reward the performance rather than rewarding maybe what is going to happen out into the future,
right?
And trying to fit a niche or a requirement now rather than, it's not perfect, but clearly we've run economies, we occasionally have breakdowns, but I would suggest that our country has a long history of, based on past performance, going with
right.
investment into the future.
Right, and I clearly understand where you're coming from. So to be able to reward, to be able to identify, I mean, for many of you, they had, within the Department of Commerce years ago, they had what was called the Malcolm Baldrige Award. Reach out to the world, identify all those good things from companies and give you the recognition, because these were companies, small, big, and large, whatever, that got great attention. When I talk about bringing the right mix of talent in, it's bringing in the economists or the people who have clear, creative ideas and saying, okay, if I got a bag of money and one of my rules of engagement is to ensure that we incentivize, we meet the following issues, etc., with the right people in there, we could put together a pretty good package. Okay? I'm not that expert. But when we identify and say, in order for us to fix this element, we've got to bring the right type of talent in, we'll be able to identify and address those issues. I'm all about open source. This has to move quickly. All right? Again, this is a collaboration model. Yes, there's a process tied to it, but the key here is I'm trying to enable things. So how best do I do it? If you've got a good idea, I'm in a position to say, let's try it. Okay? Because what I'm bringing to this fight now is the ability to turn to a four-star admiral and say, sir, I've got your solution. It's some company that came out of Black Hat or from this particular session because you knew how to provide an answer. He won't care anymore about what you're all about, but will care that you brought a solution to the fight. I'm trying to build a mechanism that puts the two together. Okay, sir. I think I have a chance for about one more question based on time. Yes, sir.
My question is also around incentivization, but in a bit of a different way. Foreign governments oftentimes celebrate their independent researchers, or whatever you want to call them, the hackers. Right. Whereas we get a lot of mixed messages. You have the DMCA and the upcoming ACTA, which try to squash independent research, security, vulnerability research, exploit development, that whole deal. Right. That's going to hamper us in the future. And I think what would help us is some heavy hitters that go in there and say, let's get this legislation right. I'm tired of being told to go talk to my congressman. I think if we had some heavy hitters in there saying, well, let's get the legislation right to actually encourage people to keep closing the holes in the software and to develop these skill sets, that'd make a big difference.
See, I applaud that question. I mean, just remember, a congressman is in Congress because of your votes. And they'll spend 90+% of their time ensuring that they get your votes. Look at the size of Black Hat. Look at the size of this organization. You've been around for 18 years, for God's sakes. You've got a supporter in me, okay? However, I need to be able to rely on Black Hat. And I could see that this organization, between Black Hat and DEFCON, forming their own legislative team, because look at the numbers of people here. The legislation that's coming out of Congress today, out of the White House, out of Capitol Hill, etc., are looking for answers. However, they're turning to the same traditional mindsets, and the thought process that they're throwing into this legislation just seems so basic, all right? And it's not going to solve the problem that you're all looking for. Part of the opportunity here is to be able to have a voice from not by Congress, but by you all. Because I'm talking the numbers that you bring, I guarantee you the members are going to listen. All right, so, you know, this is my first time here, and I look at the creativity, and you know, and I enjoy my black shirt, and I'm really impressed by what y'all are going to bring to the fight. However, my biggest concern is how are we going to leverage this? And whether it's through Moss and his team or the executive body that makes up these two groups, the cost now is in figuring out how we can make sure that there's an ear in Washington that's listening to you. Thank you all very much. I'd be delighted to answer any questions later as well. Thank you.